All right, welcome back to another episode of the Podium Pushers podcast with Justin and Brandon. We are here. We are in the midst of the last triple header. We just watched the Las Vegas Grand Prix. What a race it was. We have a new world champion. Max Verstappen is officially a four-time world champion crowned on the streets of Las Vegas. Brandon, how you feeling?
Feeling great. It was a fantastic race, and of course, to see Max here crown champion in Las Vegas was a very cool thing for me. I can't imagine how cool that was for him. I'm sure he loved it. But yeah, it was a great race, and I'm feeling good.
Yeah, he for sure loved it more and more as the night went on, as he enjoyed that Heineken sponsorship quite a bit as we got a little bit later into the night. We've got lots to talk about, so let's jump right into it with my one sentence rundown, which is where on earth did this Mercedes pace come from? They were quick for like four races in the middle of the season, and then they kind of fell off the map. We're easily the fourth fastest team again. Lewis was struggling with the car. We watched both of them struggle at Coda. And then out of nowhere, George almost won last week. Wet race, kind of an anomaly. But then this week, just absolutely incredible. It was cold, it was slippery, but Mercedes was on it from free practice one. They were the class of the field. They had 1-2s in practice. George is on pole. Lewis obviously messed up qualifying, but then during the race, he comes back to make it a Mercedes 1-2. George's win is never in doubt. I mean, what a race for Mercedes. Looked like the Mercedes of old almost.
It really did. I mean, it kind of came out of nowhere, like you said, but they were on it from the very beginning of the weekend. And, I mean, I saw it after free practice one, and I was like, okay, maybe there's something there. And then it happened again in free practice two. And you're like, all right, well, that's when we kind of do qualifying prep, qualifying runs. And it's like, all right. And then free practice three happened, and I was like, okay, well, they're actually on it. So that's crazy. But yeah, what a drive from both of the drivers. They were just fantastic. And man, if Lewis had qualified literally any higher, he probably would have won that race. So it's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. But he has had his qualifying struggles this year, but obviously he has been the better driver in race pace, and I think we saw that again this weekend. I didn't buy it until like qualifying. We've seen the Mercedes free practice Mirage too many times this year. They've shown up. It's been free practice one and two, and we're like, oh wow, Mercedes are quick. And then we show up to qualifying, and it's like, oh, they just qualified P6 and P8. What the heck happened? So I had to wait until qualifying to see it, and then really even the race. I didn't fully believe that George was going to drive away and win that race. I still expected the Ferraris to be the quickest team in race trim. And then we saw Charles fighting for the win or the lead at the front at the beginning of the Grand Prix. And then he just fell off. And then George drove away. And it really was never in doubt after that.
Yeah, I mean, I really thought Charles was going to get him at the beginning of the race, but that did not happen. And then, you know, Lewis was just kind of cutting through the field the entire time. So that was really impressive from him. And he had a chance there right before he made that mistake. He made a mistake like, I don't know, maybe like 6 laps from the end of the race. He probably could have caught George potentially before he made that mistake. And then he just kind of backed off after that and brought home the 1-2. But it
I don't
was,
know. George had kind of stepped his pace up and had stemmed the bleeding a little bit. I feel like that gap was never truly in doubt from George Russell, I feel like.
that's true. That's true. They did come on the radio. Revan Lewis was like 7 seconds behind. They were like, all right, George, pick up the pace. And then Lewis made that mistake. And then, I don't know. Yeah. But
Which just shows me that George was just cruising at the front. He built up a 20-second lead on the Ferraris, just driving around like he was driving on the strip on a normal weekend. Like he was just cruising.
yeah, no, after the race, I was watching an interview with Toto, and Toto was like, yeah, it's at some points during the race, we were 2 seconds ahead of the rest of the field, per lap on per lap pace. And I was like, that's that's crazy. I mean, really, I mean, 2 seconds is incredible over one lap. So I believe that when he was saying that. So what a race for Mercedes.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the slippery surface at Vegas, and all of the teams were just chewing through their tires. I mean, they'd have a life, and then they'd just fall off a cliff once they hit the graining point, and it felt like Mercedes just wasn't hitting that point. They could just keep making those tires last all the way to the end of a stint. Obviously, I didn't expect it to be a two stop, but even when it was, Mercedes was just clear out in front.
Yeah. It makes me think that I don't know what the temperature like is in Qatar, but definitely it's
It's
a very
hot. It's freaking
slippery,
hot.
it's a very slippery surface though. A lot of
Yeah.
dust, it's very windy. It is a night race, so hopefully it'll be a little cooler than hot. But I don't know, maybe Mercedes could be on the pace next weekend too.
We will see. They have been quick at these Abu Dhabi type tracks before, so we will have to see when we get there. Let's keep it rolling with your one sentence rundown.
My one sentence rundown, we kind of talked about it a little bit already, but mm, did Las Vegas live up to the hype? I think it did. It was I kind of we saw a lot of rumors over the weekend that, there wasn't as much hubbub, I guess you could say, around the paddock, and it was a little bit less exciting in terms of all the like fan engagement and the show around the race, but I think the race itself was fantastic. You had fighting all up and down the field. We've already talked about Mercedes, but at one point, Max Verstappen was running in the podium places. You had the Ferraris running in the podium places. You had Sergio up in like P2 for like half a second there. Uh, and then he dropped back down. That was during all the pit stops and everything. But I mean, all that. And then you also had, the Haas drivers up and running in the points, and it was great. We had some retirements, unfortunately, for Pierre Gasly. That was so bad, but I think it was a great race, and it didn't come with any of the drama that it had last year with, the drain cover situation and then repractice being delayed and all that stuff. And, there I haven't seen as much negative stuff about the fan experience. It seems like it was a better fan experience this year from like a viewing standpoint. It was less expensive ticket wise. So overall, I think Las Vegas lived up to the hype, and it was a great race. Really, really fun to watch. Fell
Yeah.
asleep on map like 2.5 and woke up and watched the rest of the mornings.
I feel like it was different than last year, but it was still good. Like last year, it got off to potentially the worst start that it could have gotten. People were angry about the track going up like a month before the race started, and then immediately cars are on track, and Carlos Sainz has his incident, and that whole debacle happens. And then it was kind of forgiven because the race was good. This year, it felt more normal. Like it felt like a Grand Prix that belonged on the calendar. And I don't know if this is a controversial opinion, but I'm kind of glad that they didn't have as much over the top fanfare things. Like there's sometimes that we can go a little bit overboard with the entertainment factor of the sport. And yes, I understand that it is entertainment and it is a spectacle, but it is a sport at the end of the day. Like we're here to see these drivers go Grand Prix racing. We're not here to see them go face to face with Bruce Buffer and hear him introduce each driver, and it'd be the most awkward thing you've ever seen. So I'm kind of glad that they backed that down a little bit this year. And then the race itself, like last year was good because we had some chaos and it was the first time we had ever been on this track, and the surface was so slippery that you had drivers going off at turn one and Lando massive crash early in the race and safety car things. This Yes, there was still this slippery surface, but it felt like a exciting normal Grand Prix. Like it was a two stop, which always adds more drama. There was overtakes going all throughout the field, like you said. It felt like a Grand Prix that belonged on the calendar this year. And I know that there is a lot of controversy on America having three races, and Vegas was kind of the one that felt like a show and maybe didn't belong. But I think this year proved that it is a good venue, it belongs on the calendar, and it can provide great racing, even when there isn't some absolutely chaos scenario going on during the Grand Prix.
Yeah, I think this was definitely the weekend that the Las Vegas Grand Prix needed to be able to kind of assure the general public, the fans, the media, maybe even some of the drivers too, that this is a race that belongs on the calendar and is hopefully here to stay for a little while. So I really enjoyed it. It was a great weekend.
Well, they've got a contract that says they're here to stay for a little while, and Formula One has purchased land in Vegas, so I'm sure they're not going anywhere. Max Verstappen, he's a full-time world champion. We couldn't get too far into the podcast without talking about it. The car wasn't really competitive this weekend. Apparently, Red Bull brought the wrong rear wing to Las Vegas, had to cut up the rear wing they had. It looked awful on the car. I got to be honest with you. Because the sponsor logos were in the wrong place for the divots they put in the wing. It looked pretty terrible. Let's be honest with ourselves. But he did enough to secure the world championship. Somehow finished in front of both McLarens. They've looked kind of slow since we came back from our fall break. But man, what a race for Max. What a weekend for Max. What a season for Max. Is this his best championship yet?
Honestly, I think, yeah. I think, you know, as impressive as last year was winning 19 races, we knew that that probably wasn't going to happen again. I mean, that's arguably the most dominant season in Formula One history from a driver. And to see him, kind of prevail with the cool head in a situation that, or the most similar situation he had to 2021 fighting with Lewis. I mean, I think that just shows how deserving of a champion he is. I mean, we've talked about it kind of time and time again over the last few weeks, but yeah, I think this was his best championship winning season so far in Formula One. Winning 8 races, far and away the most races won by a single driver this season. And, he took advantage of the opportunities that he was given with winning 7 of the first 10 races in the season. And then when he needed a win, most of all in Brazil, he took it. And that moment, really sealed the championship for him. And like I said last week or a couple weeks ago when we were talking about it, but that was the moment that sealed it up for him. And I think definitely his best season yet.
Yeah, it has to be this championship or 2021. 22 and 23 were great. He had a little bit of a fight at the beginning of 22, but I think, eventually that Red Bull clearly became the fastest car. Max was just at one with it and was performing well. 21 obviously has the stain of Abu Dhabi over it and kind of, can dampen our view of that in our minds. But that was still a great year, and I don't want to discredit Max, and he deserves something for the very first time he had a car capable of winning a championship, going up against Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes at the height of their dominance, and he won. That has to say something. Kudos to him for that. That was an incredible year as well. But this year, I mean, there were times where his car was the third and fourth fastest car throughout the year. And yes, you see people online try and discredit it by saying, oh, he had the fastest car for the first 7 rounds of the season. Yeah, okay, one of those he DNF'd, and we had a 24 round long season. Like, there will be more races this year where Red Bull is not the dominant car than it was. And so, like, I think I saw something online that said Lando Norris only needed to outscore Max Verstappen by 3 points a race from Miami to have been able to win the championship, which isn't a massive amount, but I wasn't able to do it. Max Verstappen, I think just, last year we saw a masterclass of winning Grand Prix. This year we saw a masterclass of damage limitation and just getting the most out of the car almost every single weekend. I think he's fully deserving of the championship this year, and I agree. I do think this is his best championship performance so far.
Yeah, and just not to talk about Sergio too much again, but
Oh, here it is. Here it is.
here it is. You know, to kind of highlight how not competitive the car is. I mean, Red Bull's going to finish third in the Constructors' Championship, and that just shows how great of a season Max had. For them to be so far off of the championship, I mean, mathematically it's still possible, but it isn't going to happen. There's no way. And for, the way that Sergio is driving that car and then Max is driving that car, that just shows how competitive it was and, how great of a season this really was for Max Verstappen.
Yeah. And before everybody gets on our backs that says the Red Bull is perfectly designed for Max Verstappen, yes, they favor him. Clearly, neither of those drivers are fully agreeing with that car this year. Max has been the one to get the maximum out of it and perform as well as he can. So kudos to Max Verstappen. I'm sure we will talk more about Sergio Perez later in this podcast. But you mentioned the constructors fight. And that championship has to be fully wide open right now. Ferrari outscored McLaren again this weekend. I don't know what's going on with McLaren right now. They seem all happy. They were congratulating Max. They were joking with him all weekend long. But that pace in the McLaren just seems to have kind of vanished a little bit after the fall break. We went into that 4 week gap before Austin, and McLaren were the clear fastest car. We just saw Lando Norris absolutely dominate in Singapore. And then we showed up to Austin and we were like, hey, they might be the third fastest car. And then that pace hasn't really come back. They showed flashes of it in Brazil, had the race gone dry, maybe they would have had a better performance there. I am quietly confident in their pace for Qatar based on how they performed there last year, but it is in a different time of the calendar, and we just saw Mercedes perform incredibly well at a slippery track at night, and it will be hotter in Qatar, but we'll have to see where that lines up. And then Ferrari, they came to Austin, didn't even have any upgrades, won that race, came to Mexico, won that race, and they've just been performing incredibly well since that fall break. If they keep outscoring McLaren and this pace, they win the Constructors' Championship. So it has to be fully wide open. We're done talking about the drivers, but we have got something to watch in the Constructors' fight.
Yeah, it will definitely come down to Abu Dhabi, which is so exciting for a championship to come down to the last race. And man, it's gonna be so awesome if Ferrari can pull it off. It's just what a story for Ferrari this year. What a story for Carlos Sainz as he bows out to become a Formula One world champion in, some form or fashion, is just amazing. And, you know, McLaren, they just seemed kind of nowhere this weekend. They were just off the pace, and then you thought maybe after FP3 it seemed like they had a little bit better pace, and then in qualifying, what were they, P6 and P8?
Yeah.
And that's about what they finished the race in. So it's like they weren't able to make any ground up in race pace, anything like that, and then I don't know. It's weird to see their pace just fall off, but if Mercedes is performing well and McLaren isn't able to take advantage of these opportunities, they're going to win the Constructors' Championship. Especially if they have another weekend like this, they're going to make it easy for Ferrari and Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I mean, Mercedes getting quick is almost McLaren's worst nightmare because they don't need another team finishing in front of them if their pace truly has been surpassed by Ferrari. Like if they finished right behind Ferrari, like they'd be okay. But if they have Mercedes getting up there, that could be an absolute nightmare for them. This weekend, luckily for them, it was kind of a blessing in disguise because Ferrari could have gone and, finished 1-2 in that race had Mercedes not been there. But if we go to a track where Ferrari is faster, but Mercedes is still ahead of McLaren, that could be their worst nightmare. Speaking of Ferrari, Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc, great weekend from them. P3, P4, can't complain. They had a little bit of drama between them, a little bit of team orders. They were fighting each other. They went back and forth on who was the quickest during the Grand Prix, which is kind of something we don't see from those drivers. Usually, Charles is clearly quicker. And then there's these weekends where from like FP1, Carlos Sainz is randomly 2.5 tenths quicker than Charles, and that's just how it goes the whole weekend. They were pretty evenly matched this weekend, almost exactly. It looked like it was going to be one of those weekends where Carlos was magically ahead of Charles all weekend long, and of course it was because you predicted it to happen. I was like, here we freaking go. Carlos is going to get pole, going to win the race. I'm about to throw away this predictions championship. But they're pretty evenly matched during the Grand Prix. There was some team order controversy of Carlos overtaking Charles when he was told not to. I'm of the opinion that Carlos is like, what are you going to do? Fire me? He's kind of going out at Ferrari. But also, we have seen in the past that Carlos is a little hesitant to follow some team orders. So a little bit of drama at Ferrari this weekend, but still outscored McLaren by 13 points. They're looking good.
Yeah, there was a little drama, and I agree. I think Carlos is like, oh, you're not going to bench me for Ollie Beerman these last two
Yeah.
years. So yeah, and also I think Carlos was legitimate to not follow those orders because, like you said, the race pace was pretty even. There were times in the race where Carlos was faster, and there were times in the race where Charles was faster. So I think it was a deserving podium from him, and Charles had a great race too. I mean, for Ferrari, they needed to kind of finish as high as they could, and that's what they did. And unfortunately, I think there really was no catching Mercedes. That first like 5 laps gave us a little bit of a false hope there.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, it was a great weekend for both of those drivers. So
Yeah. And in Carlos's defense, Ferrari absolutely messed up his race by that little pit stop blunder of them not being out when they were telling him to come in. And you
he
could
would have.
argue that he would not have been as close to Charles on the track had that not happened. So in his defense, I kind of understand it, and I'm not upset that he finished in P3 because a certain one of us predicted it to happen. So it all worked out okay. But we've talked about the man who is replacing him at Ferrari next year a little bit, Lewis Hamilton. He was probably the quickest driver all weekend long. He was the lead Mercedes in practice, had his mistake in qualifying. Unfortunately, from that point, the win was probably never on. But P10 to P2, it's like it was nothing. I mean, from the very get-go of this Grand Prix, he was overtaking left, right, and center. It felt like every time they'd kind of show what was going on at the front, oh, mini box on the left. Here goes Lewis Hamilton up the inside of another car, just making light work of it. And then after like the first round of pit stops, he's P2. Like, what happened? Just absolutely incredible performance from Lewis Hamilton. He's fighting off the washed allegations. They've been coming in heavy recently, and deservedly so. He has been not performing great these last couple of races. But I think this weekend just shows what he can still do with a car that is competitive and a car that agrees with him.
Yeah, I think it was kind of strange coming into the weekend, hearing things like Lewis saying like, "Yeah, man, I really didn't want to come back for the last three races this season after Brazil," and then Toto saying, "Yeah, we failed Lewis," like, and then here comes Lewis showing why he's a seven-time world champion, and just taking advantage of a great opportunity when Mercedes had the pace, and I think if he qualifies P9, he's winning the race. I think. Yeah, it's that mistake in qualifying is just really, really unfortunate because he probably would have been P2 at a minimum in qualifying. Uh, so, oh well.
Yeah, just a weekend of what could have been in some senses, but getting to watch the P10 to P2 was also pretty special. I hope that this pace continues for the rest of the year so we can send Lewis out on a high. Like if the season ended after Brazil and that's how we said goodbye to Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes, that would have been kind of sad based on all the history they have and all the winning they've done and there was a time where we were kind of sick of Mercedes winning and we're like, okay, this can stop now and we'll watch someone else win. But I mean, that was greatness we were watching whenever Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes were winning drivers and constructors title. We were watching Formula One history unfold before our eyes. And I'm glad that we got to see at least one more weekend of Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton looking strong, looking competitive, looking competent, honestly. And so I hope that it continues for the rest of the year so we get to see Lewis off on a high note with Mercedes.
Yeah, my I have two dream scenarios for Abu Dhabi. Either a Lewis Hamilton win or a Carlos Sainz win. That's it. Those would be the best case scenarios. I would love for either of those drivers to go um, off and to their new respective teams carrying a win out. So we'll see what happens. But
Give
I
me a
think that,
Lewis Hamilton win, Ferrari 2-3. They win the constructors over McLaren at the last gasp. That's what's going to happen. Signed, sealed, delivered. Mark it down right now. That's the script for Abu Dhabi.
man, if that comes true, you heard it here first.
Absolutely. All right, our top step driver of the weekend. I'm gonna go with George Russell. You could make the argument that it was Lewis Hamilton. He has to get docked a little bit for me just because of the qualifying error. Like that makes it like a 9.7 out of 10 for him. But George Russell, he was on it during the free practices. He was on it when it counted in qualifying. Really a great qualifying performance from him to go provisional pole and then be like, hey, I need to be the last driver over the line. And then that happened. Carlos Sainz had stolen pole from him. He takes it back because of being the last driver and getting that extra bit of track evolution. So great Saturday performance from or Friday performance from him, I guess. And then during the Grand Prix, really never in doubt. There was that one moment with Charles Leclerc, and then he just drove away, stemmed the bleeding at the end when it looked like Lewis Hamilton was catching up. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be George Russell.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Friday coming through on Friday night. Um, that was a great qualifying performance and his win really wasn't in doubt after like lap 4, lap 5. Um, so it was a great weekend from George. My top step driver of the weekend, I've gone with Nico Hulkenberg. Um, we'll talk about it a little bit more later with some of your predictions. But he scored valuable points from with Haas. He finished, I think, P8 in the race and qualified P9. So he was gaining positions from qualifying in the race. It's all you can ask for if you're Haas. And he helped Haas take over P6 in the Constructors' Championship. And it's a extremely tight battle for that position in the constructors right now as well as it is up front. So we'll see what happens. But it was a great drive from Nico. He just kind of a smart race and doing what he needed to score valuable points. So wanted to highlight him as my top step over the weekend.
Yeah, that is a vintage Nico Hulkenberg best of the rest drive. That is like 2018 era Nico Hulkenberg. Absolutely incredible performance. Maybe he should have been my top set driver because that overtake on Yuki on like lap 49 absolutely sealed up my prediction. So I appreciate that, Nico. Thank you very much. Speaking of our predictions, let's recap them. I'm currently winning 24-20 from the outset of the weekend. It looked pretty rough for me. I got to be honest. I thought I was about to lose a lot of ground. Perhaps that did not happen. Podium pusher of the weekend, I went for Ferrari. And as much as I want to give myself this point, I can't do it. You know, we were expecting them to win. They underperformed from what we expected from them this weekend. They had team order drama. They messed up Carlos's pit stop. Perhaps there was more on the table for them. And so, as much as I want to, I cannot claim this point because it was a bit of a mess of a weekend from Ferrari, even though they finished 3 and 4.
I think that's fair. And if you might think, of course you think it's fair, Brennan, because
Yeah, Brandon's not gonna say, "Oh no, Justin, you should take that point." Yeah, okay, okay.
And, but I with Max Verstappen, looking back on it, maybe that was just the safest pick of all time. But yeah, it was a great weekend for Max. Even though the car wasn't ultra competitive in the race, he did what he needed to win the championship, and we saw the celebrations afterwards. It was a great night for Max, and for him to join the list of four-time world champions, that's like six drivers long now with Max on it. It's just incredible, and it's a great accomplishment for him, and um, deserving world champion, like we said earlier.
Yeah, if it was a normal weekend, perhaps I wouldn't give you that point for a P5 finish for Max Verstappen, but I can't say, oh, he just became a four-time world champion. He's not podium pusher. So, yeah, you get that point locked in. Speaking of him being a full-time world champion, I saw today that he beat Sebastian Vettel's record for fastest four-time world champion after winning your first by 1 day. So because the Las Vegas Grand Prix was held on a Saturday, Max Verstappen now holds that record. So congratulations, Max. Another record for you. Back marker of the weekend, I went for Esteban Ocon. And yes, has to be that. Solidly outperformed by Pierre Gasly. And then had the weirdest pit stop error where he just like drove through the pit lane because Alpine mechanics weren't out there. They gave him a self-imposed drive-through penalty. I don't know if that was his fault or the team's fault. Either way, his race was absolutely done after that. Was one of the few drivers to finish a lap down. So yes, Esteban Ocon, back marker of the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. He, made that really easy for us to say. I went with Lance Stroll. Also, just not a great weekend from Lance. He didn't qualify super well. Was kind of
Qualified
driving around.
P20. That's as bad as it gets.
Uh, this is true. I guess he finished a little higher in the race. But he was, kind of just driving around in the back of the field, not really doing anything. Didn't really seem to have the pace. When Fernando seemed to have a little bit more pace. Not a great race from Fernando either. But yeah, so Lance definitely back marker of the weekend.
Hey, Fernando took what was maybe the worst strategy of all time, starting on the soft tires in Vegas and almost scored a point. He finished P11,
True.
and then Lance, he finished P13, I believe, but never really had an effect on the Grand Prix. Like it was never like, oh, he could maybe score points. And then, yeah, qualifying P20, I know that they had to take his entire car apart and that he barely got out there. But it was so funny listening to the commentators being like, yeah, I'm sure that he won't get P20. And then he crosses the line and they're like, oh, he did. And so, yeah, Lance Stroll, back marker. I agree. We both had some pretty great predictions for that poll. This would have been great if Mercedes didn't exist, but none of us could have seen that coming. I went for Charles Leclerc. Incorrect.
And everyone's Carlos Sainz. also incorrect. So
Our podium, I went with Carlos Sainz in P3, which did happen, so that is a point for me.
it's true. I went with Charles in P3. Oh, so close.
Yeah, I went for Max Verstappen in P2. That did not happen.
Same for me. Max Verstappen P2.
Yeah, I went for Charles in P1. Thought it was going to be a better weekend for Ferrari. No point for me.
And then I also thought it was going to be a better week for Ferrari because I have Carlos in P1, which did not happen. So you got a point up on me there.
Let's go. And then our two push-in predictions. My first one was that the constructors' standings would change after the weekend. I thought no way that was going to happen after Pierre Gasly put it P3 and then Yuki was in front of Nico. I said this ain't going to happen. And then hey, it all worked out. Nico Hulkenberg last or not last lap, but towards the end of the Grand Prix overtaking Yuki. Thank you very much for that. And then my second was that neither V-Carb driver would make it into Q3 and then Yuki Tsunoda absolutely incredible qualifying performance from him. Haven't really mentioned it. Both V Cup drivers did out qualify Sergio Perez, but Yuki Tsunoda really performed it. I think Yuki Tsunoda could like win the world championship in a V Carb and not be considered for that Red Bull seat. So that's pretty unfortunate for him. But he did ruin my prediction and by making it into Q3.
Yeah, it was a great performance from Yuki. Also a great race from Yuki to pick up a couple points in a very timely fashion when they really need it. So great job, Yuki. We don't say that a lot on the podcast, but great job. My two predictions, I got Sergio Perez is out in Q1. Perfect. Perfect from Sergio. He never lets me down
Yeah.
when he
Cannot
lets me
believe
down.
you got that point. Like, had it been him not reaching Q3, I would have been like, sure, he got it, but Q1 exit, unbelievable.
Yeah, it was a bold prediction, and Sergio's a bold driver. That's all I'll say. He is. And then Ferrari scores the most points over the weekend. I really put all my eggs in the Ferrari basket this weekend, and it did not happen. Unfortunately, they did score the second most points. So that's cool. Doesn't give me a point, but it is cool.
Yeah, and the team that beat him wasn't McLaren, so we've still got a constructors fight on our hands. The fans at Ty_Burner13 says a Williams finishes in the top seven. That did not happen. Williams was kind of nowhere. At Qwerty Plopper says Oscar wins, which hands Max the championship. I'll give him a half point. Max won the championship. The Oscar win was never on. Oscar Piastri has kind of been letting down McLaren recently. This is a hot take. I don't want to get too far into it, but we've been dogging on Sergio for not helping Red Bull. Oscar's kind of dropped off the face of the planet after we thought he was going to outperform Lando Norris. And so I just want to put that out there. And I think Oscar Piastri is letting McLaren down a little bit right now.
Yeah, they really needed to be scoring points, qualifying really high. And one of those things happened this weekend. He did score points.
All right. Back to the fan predictions. At a mighty Margara says Max wins the championship. Had to throw one of those in there. That is a point right there. Our updated prediction scores. I'm still up by four. It's 27-23 to me. You got two races left. Got a sprint in there. We'll see what happens. And so it is still on. Anything could happen. We're putting lots of points out there. We'll have to see which one of us is McLaren, which one of us is Ferrari in this bad boy.
No, I'm thinking I'm Ferrari right now, so we'll see what happens.
All right. We don't even know they're gonna win the constructors. We could like say that and then something wild could happen in Red Bull. I'm just kidding. That's not gonna happen. That is all we have got for the Las Vegas Grand Prix. As always, thanks for watching and listening to another episode of the Podium Pushers podcast. Before we get out of here, Brandon, what are your parting podium thoughts?
Parting podium thoughts is here in the United States, it's Thanksgiving weekend, and I just want to say that we are both thankful for every person who watches and listens to this podcast. So thank you for listening to us. We have so much support, and we're just really thankful. So
Yes,
happy
it is Thanksgiving. Eat some turkey, subscribe to the podcast, follow us on social media, and we will see you in the next one.